The Batman film series has been a mainstay of popular cinema for many decades now. Ever since Tim Burton's 1989 blockbuster, audiences have been continuously enthralled by the Dark Knight's adventures, whether it be Michael Keaton, Christian Bale, Ben Affleck, or someone else underneath the cowl. Batman has always been a wildly popular character in film, and that is partly what makes it so hard to believe the slump that the character found himself in during the late 1990s. You see, the series of films started by Burton in '89 had ran themselves into the ground, and by the release of 1997's Batman and Robin,
what killed the dinosaurs? The Ice Age!
Warner Brothers were unsure as to what the future held for the Caped Crusader, if the character even had a future. In the years that followed, the studio attempted a number of different scripts and projects aiming to bring back the Batman film series, ranging from the dark, Taxi Driver-like take by Darren Aronofsky to a Batman-Superman team-up movie that almost saw Josh Hartnett become the Man of Steel.
This is why Superman works alone.
But in this video, I want to touch on the immediate aftermath of Batman and Robin's critical and commercial failure, the impact it had on the Batman film series as a whole, and the two competing screenplays which promised to bring the Dark Knight back to his glory days: Batman Unchained, also commonly known as Batman Triumphant, and Batman DarKnight. Batman and Robin was released into theatres on the 20th of June 1997 and quickly found itself becoming the final nail in the coffin of the Dark Knight cinematic franchise. While the loss of original director Tim Burton and the lukewarm response to 1995's Batman Forever had begun to disillusion audiences, it would be Batman and Robin's camp, frantic and toyetic nature that would ultimately drive them away for good. While the film did have a strong opening weekend, making an estimated $43 million domestically, Warner Brothers was soon resolved to the failure as the film grossed only $238 million worldwide. In comparison, its predecessor Batman Forever had made $336 million, and Marvel and Fox's X-Men film released just 3 years later would gross $296 million. In the aftermath of Batman and Robin's release though, director Joel Schumacher and producer Peter McGregor-Scott did acknowledge the film's shortfalls, citing a rushed production schedule and a desire for the studio to make a more family-friendly product. However, the most surprising part about Batman and Robin's failure was that it genuinely caught Warner Brothers off guard. The studio was taken aback by the film's poor reception, having seen largely positive results from the film's early test screenings. And this proved a problem, as the studio had already begun work on a follow-up film, aiming for a 1999 release date. Schumacher had already signed up for his third film in the series, while screenwriter Mark Protasevich replaced Akiva Goldsman, who had penned the past two entries. Protasevich was approached by Warner Brothers to work on a new Batman movie the year prior, and by this point had all but completed his draft for the upcoming film. Now, he and Schumacher had met several times during the production of Batman and Robin, and discussed their mutual desire to move away from the overly camp nature of the previous two films, and instead explore more of the psychological aspect of the Batman character. This notion is evident in the pair's work. While Batman Unchained, as it was then known, did still carry over an element of the previous film's humour and family-friendly nature, it wasn't anywhere near as overbearing and loud as Batman and Robin, counterbalancing the camp with genuinely dark moments and a compelling story. Batman Unchained was to introduce the Scarecrow to the Batman film series, while also bringing in the recently created character of Harley Quinn, though depicted as the long-lost daughter of the Joker seeking revenge for her father's death in the original 1989 film, with Nicolas Cage and Courtney Love heavily eyed for the two roles. The script would see the pair of villains unite and use Scarecrow's fear toxin to torment Batman and hold him to trial for the deaths of many of his rogues gallery. In what was described by Warner Brothers executives as the most expensive sequence ever written, the film was to include hallucinations of all of Batman's previous villains, including Jim Carrey's Riddler, Tommy Lee Jones's Two-Face, Danny DeVito's Penguin, and most surprisingly, even Jack Nicholson as the Joker. Protasevich wanted Batman to have to deal with the emotional guilt of his actions throughout the previous 4 movies, and by confronting his past demons, conquer his fear and emerge a better hero. And by doing this, Batman Unchained would serve as the culmination for the entire Batman franchise and offer a sense of finality to both Schumacher and Burton's films. Ultimately, as the grand failure of Batman and Robin began to settle in at Warner Bros., the studio quickly moved away from this project. While they weren't prepared to give up on Batman entirely, the studio executives felt that moving away from Schumacher would be the best thing for the series, and eventually scrapped Protasevich's script in favour of one penned by Lee Shapiro and Stephen Weiss, entitled Batman: Dark Knight. Batman: Dark Knight, awful title aside, was pitched by Shapiro to Warner Bros. Executives in the summer of 1998, with the pair of writers attempting to pen a film which served as a follow-up to the existing Batman movies, while also being a clear move away from the tonal style of the Schumacher films. After a successful meeting with executive Greg Silverman, Warner Bros. Greenlit Shapiro and Weiss's pitch, with the pair ultimately turning in the screenplay for Dark Knight 3 months after their first meeting. Dark Knight, much like Batman Unchained, would see the villainous Scarecrow brought to the big screen, but few other similarities exist between the two projects. Here, we find a Bruce Wayne, still played by George Clooney, now retired, reclused, and distant from the now college student Dick Grayson, with Chris O'Donnell reprising his role. Now, Dick's ascendancy to adulthood and his stepping out of Batman's shadow was going to be an integral part of this film, with Dr. Jonathan Crane, Scarecrow's alias, depicted as Dick's college professor of psychology, suffering from a disease that prevented him from feeling physical pain. Now, Crane would eventually kidnap and experiment on Grayson in Arkham Asylum, while also transforming his colleague, Dr. Kurt Langstrom, into the villainous creature Man-Bat. This would begin a series of events that would force Batman back into action, as Man-Bat's murderous acts were being seen as to be committed by Batman. As you can see, the film took a much darker approach to the Batman series, introducing elements from the ever-popular 1987 graphic novel The Dark Knight Returns, while toying with some horror and psychological thriller aspects also. For example, when Shapiro described Scarecrow's characterization in the film, he stated that his sense of touch is off, so it's heightened his other senses, and it made him like a living scarecrow. He gets physically scarred during a confrontation with Man-Bat, and that scarring of his face would become his mask. It becomes the stitches he puts on himself, and the cauterizing of the wounds and all of that stuff. His face becomes the Scarecrow mask. It's clear that Shapiro and Weiss had big intentions for this film, while also hoping that its success could spawn a new trilogy of Batman movies in its vein. The Hollywood Reporter note that future plans involve Dick's ascendancy to the role of Nightwing, and the introduction of new villains such as Killer Croc, Clayface, and Harley Quinn. However, despite handing in their final draft in late 1998, the screenwriters heard nothing back from Warner Bros. For some time, as the studio remained hesitant on which direction to take the Batman film series. Dark Knight ultimately lingered on in development hell until 2001, when Jeff Robinov was appointed producer for the Batman film franchise, scrapping the film in favour of moving away from any of the previous movies, instead evaluating the possibility of a back-to-basics reboot in the style of Frank Miller's Batman Year One. These series of movies that had existed since 1989 finally were laid to rest, and the Batman franchise lay dormant until 2005, as the aforementioned projects all failed to materialise, and ultimately paved the way for Christopher Nolan to reinvent the character and bring the hero back to the big screen in 2005's Batman Begins. Nevertheless, I find it fascinating to look at what might have been, and assess the different attempts made to breathe new life into this failing series in the aftermath of Batman and Robin. If either Unchained or Dark Knight had been made, it's fair to say that the Batman series would look wildly different today. Had they succeeded, it's very likely the studio would never have allowed for a filmmaker like Nolan to do such a drastically different take on the character, and if they failed, it very well could have killed the possibility of another Batman film altogether. In the end though, all we can do now is speculate, and imagine what could have been if either Batman Unchained or Batman Dark Knight had stepped in front of cameras in the late 1990s, and how it would have affected the future of the live-action Batman adaptations. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please make sure to leave a like on the video and leave a comment down below as well. Let me know which of these two planned sequels to Batman and Robin would you like to have seen the most, if any at all, or are you happy that we got the film that we ultimately got in Batman Begins? Let me know in the comments. I can't wait to hear what you have to say as always. If you're new to the channel, please consider hitting the subscribe button for more videos like this one, and there are some other videos on screen right now that you may enjoy if you enjoyed this one. You can support me on Patreon at patreon.com/OwenLikesComics if you want to help me make more videos, and you can follow me on Twitter just at OwenLikesComics. That's all for me. I will see you all next time. So until then, take care and keep reading.